Hello and welcome to FTD Talk. My name is John James and I'm a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence and an advocate for men's mental health. In this week's episode, I talked to Phil Mitchell about the sexual abuse of boys. And what I found interesting about this conversation is through our chat, I discovered that the words that I've been using to try and get men to come forward about their abuse is all wrong. I've been using words like vulnerability, which don't sit well with men. So this conversation changed my mind and changed how I will work with men in the future. It was a fascinating conversation and I hope you find it fascinating too. But before we go, hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. The bigger the channel gets, the more people I can help. You take care of yourselves, look after each other. Peace.
Little bird, won't you sing for me? I wanna hear your song through the cypress trees. I'm a blue, baby, I'm a blue bird. I come from women with the last name wise, gold in their hearts and stars in their eyes.
Okay, Phil, welcome to FTD Talk. And before we get into it, can you please tell me a bit about who Phil Mitchell is?
Yeah, so as well as being the bald bloke off EastEnders, which a lot of people say, which is a great icebreaker. So I've been working as a counsellor, psychotherapist, therapist, whichever word you want to use, for just over 17 years, a few years as a volunteer whilst in training, part-time jobs, full-time jobs, and now for the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've been working for myself, predominantly working with boys and men who've been affected by recent and or historic sexual abuse. Interestingly, from that work, I found that more boys and men have been sort of referred to me, sent to me, making inquiries where they've experienced different types of abuse, so domestic abuse, false allegations, various things such as that. But yeah, in a nutshell, I guess Phil Mitchell is a guy that works with other guys who've experienced various forms of abuse, and I've been doing that for the last 17 and a bit years.
Awesome. And we are here to talk about a sensitive subject, which is the abuse of boys. What are some of the signs of abuse that we might see?
Well, this is an interesting one. So in 2009, the government at the time released a very, what you could call a comprehensive guide on sexual exploitation, child sexual exploitation. It wasn't perfect, but then again, nothing is. But the document at the time, or the guidance at the time, went into, I would say, a decent amount of detail about boys and young men, sexual abuse, and the warning signs. Now, the really interesting thing is that on one of the pages, it says, here are a list of signs, behaviors, indicators, whatever word you want to use, that children will display or may display to let you know they are being or are at risk of being sexually exploited. And it lists them, ... Things like repeated sexually transmitted infections, going missing, turning up with gifts or items and they've been secretive or they're lying about how they got it. They've been hanging around with an older adult. They're not at school. Their whereabouts are unknown, that sort of thing. Then you turn a few pages later and it says boys and young men. And it says, here are a list of risk indicators, warning signs, etc., that boys will / may display to let you know they may be being sexually exploited. And it lists them. They're exactly the same as, or more or less exactly the same as the one on the previous page, generally speaking. Now, there are certain signs that are different. So pregnancies, miscarriages, terminations, etc. You will see that in girls, not boys, for obvious reasons. And whilst you can see certain warning signs in boys, and you might see them in boys more often than you see them than in girls, there are no behaviours that are just boys and just girls. Again, apart from the issues on pregnancies, miscarriages and terminations, as I said. And I think what the problem is, the reason I mentioned the 2009 guidance, even though it's a long time ago, is it does a better job, or in my opinion anyway, of what the current guidance does. The current guidance doesn't really touch upon boys and young men. In fact, any current guidance about sexual abuse, sexual harm, anything like that, violence, it focuses a lot more on boys and men as perpetrators and less on potential victims. So we've really gone the other way, which is deeply problematic. But the warning signs are exactly this, are more or less in general terms exactly the same. So, for example, if you are aware of a child, let's call this child Sam. Sam is 15. Sam is going missing. Sam comes home and doesn't tell parents where they've been. Sam's not at school. Sam comes home late with a bag of weed and says they found it on the street. Sam is then seen in town being driven around by an older adult, and Sam won't tell anyone where they've been, and so on. Now, Sam could be a boy or a girl, but what happens is, generally speaking, when you see, when you look at those warning signs, if you have a referral or a risk assessment and you're part of a multi-agency team of professionals consisting of police, social care, health, youth offending, education, etc., generally speaking, a lot of those teams, they look at the referral of Sam. And if Sam is a girl, they'll go, this might be child sexual exploitation. We need to get further information. We need to go from there. When Sam is a boy and it's exactly the same position, it's crime, it's drugs, it's probably youth offending. And that is gender bias. And that's part of the problem. So the warning signs are out there, but how we interpret them is very problematic. I had a job where I worked in the voluntary sector for about, I can't remember, 8 or 9 years. And every week, my team and I would sit in various meetings such as this, and we would see professionals screening these risk assessment documents, saying, well, we don't know if it's CSE, we can't do anything. And my team and I would often go, hang on, if this boy was a girl, what would you think then? And there'd either be a deathly silence, the metaphorical tumbleweed would roll past, they would sort of say nothing, or they'd get very defensive. But this sort of mentality is still here today. I have practitioners phoning me, I won't say every week, that's an example, every month I get an email, a text, a direct message, something saying, yeah, we see this all the time, this happens. Before COVID hit, I was delivering a lot of training, and on every single event, someone would come up to me and say, that happens here, that happens here, that happens here. And so so in answer to your question, the warning signs are, Bernardo's, NSPCC, Children's Society, the Children's Commissioner, they've all got them and they're all pretty consistent. I should say that those warning signs alert us to potential child sexual exploitation. They can also mean potential criminal exploitation, youth offending and things like that, and other things. But generally speaking, certainly my experience, and backed up by a number of reports and research documents, they show that, well, if a girl displays those behaviours, we're going to consider child sexual exploitation. If a boy displays exactly the same behaviours, generally speaking, we won't.
Well, a lot of the things that that could mean child sexual abuse, such as nervousness or anxiety, or things like that, withdrawal, they could mean a lot of things. So does that mean that the sexual abuse is missed a lot of the time?
It's a tricky one because you're right. Those signs, being nervous, withdrawal, things like that, it alerts you to something going on. It doesn't necessarily mean it is absolutely definitely sexual abuse or exploitation. I would probably say in most cases it's not. It might be falling out with friends, being bullied, struggling with bereavement, exam stress. Could be lots of things, but it's about noticing it and being curious about it. And I think that's the thing. It's not about being one extreme or the other. So it's not, oh my God, I'm panicking, I'm worried, I'm going to tie them up to the radiator and never let my child out of the house ever again and never ever speak to anyone. But at the same time, I don't care, I'm really not bothered. It's about being curious. And if you're curious as a parent, carer, a professional, anything like that, that's the thing to really be thinking about, to be curious. But yeah, you're right. Being nervous and being anxious doesn't mean that they're being abused. That coupled with other things. So it's where the behavior starts to become a little bit out of the ordinary. The problem that you have is when a young person displays behavior that's out of the ordinary, some people sadly will just leave it because it doesn't seem to be that bad. It's not causing loads of dramas. But the thing is, then what happens is the out of ordinary behavior becomes the norm. Yeah. So if all of a sudden this young person started coming home late once a week, and then it goes to twice a week, but then it goes to twice a week, and it's been like that for 8 months. By the end of those 8 months, you can say, well, they've been doing it for ages. Yeah, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be worried. Something could be going on and you don't know. So it is about being curious. But I think in boys, we miss the signs, or we sometimes misinterpret the signs, because society and the mainstream media is just very quick to see boys and men as bad, terrible, evil perpetrators. You know, we have various people, thankfully the minority, but they are a loud minority, that just demonize boys and men, hate boys and men, criminalize them. And I just think, you know, can you just imagine being a 15-year-old boy today? You get to the point in life where you realize that someone in your life is forcing you to do things you don't want to do. You've been manipulated or coerced into doing sexual things you don't want to do, but you don't know what to say. You don't know how to say it. Who do you go to? And then you pick up a newspaper. I sound like an old man, don't I? But you know what I mean? You pick up a newspaper, or you watch something on Google News. You see, you turn the TV on, and you get people going, yes, all men. Men are bad. Men need to take responsibility. It's like, we're not, hardly anyone is considering the impact that this has on male victims, and I think many people don't care. So I don't think it's not just that we're not just overlooking it, but we're actually, I think in some ways we're making it harder for boys and men to come forward and disclose.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of apathy out there to all boys and men's issues. A lot of apathy from men and women.
Oh, absolutely. And that's an interesting point. There's some people that have said, well, there's a lot of talk on misogyny, which, yeah, absolutely there is. And whilst in some ways that is an issue that needs addressing, of course it is. Any hateful attitude that influences behavior needs addressing. We focus on that and we totally ignore misandry, the hatred of men and so on. And I think that whilst misandry is often interpreted as the vicious, extreme hate of boys and men, and that is one type of it, but it can be a little bit more subtle. Yeah, it's not just like that. And also, there's this myth that men display misogyny and women display misandry, and men can display misandry and women can display misogyny as well. It's very unusual, rigid thinking. But you're right, there is this whole, I mean, there's been research, there's been social experiment after social experiment, and the findings are generally consistent that shows that when it comes to the suffering of boys and men, they are absolutely last in the queue to get any support or attention.
And when it comes to, say, I mean, a parent is there a lot of the time, but a teacher isn't there a lot of the time, and neighbors aren't there a lot of the time. So if they see the signs, how does one go about reporting that? Do they report it? I mean, I'd be really nervous about reporting anything.
Yeah.
Because it could be misinterpreted. I mean, social services get it wrong a lot. And if they can't win. If they take them out too early, they're criticised. If they take them out too late, they're criticised. So how does one go about
it is very tricky. I guess there's so many different scenarios to think, but I think if you've got concern, so if you are, I think, a parent or a carer, and you are seeing that your son or daughter or whoever the young person is, and you're noticing something, it's about listening to your gut. What have you got, this sort of sense inside that something doesn't feel right, this is out of character, what's going on here? Even if, and this is a bit of a weird one, but even if your son or daughter is suddenly really happy and really excited, it might be that they're really happy and excited because they've got this secret older boyfriend or girlfriend online they're not telling anyone about. And it might be that they think, well, they love me, I love them, it doesn't matter that they're 30 and I'm 15, for example. But so it's about that curiosity. So the first, unless it's absolutely in your face, urgent blues and twos, be curious and speak to the young person. Everything all right? I just noticed this. Is everything all right? Do you want to tell me anything? Is what's going on? What's happening? And just be curious. Don't, I'm not really bothered, but don't panic. And that's the thing. Don't panic and go over the top, but don't be really dismissive. Be curious. Be sort of cautiously, casually curious. If you're sitting with your son or daughter in the bedroom, you don't need to panic because they're sitting with you right there in that moment. They are okay and they're safe. If you show curiosity and you do it because, well, I care about you, I love you, I just want you to be okay. That's just, I'm seeing a few things, I'm hearing a few things, it just makes me wonder. Then that's a good start. Then their reaction can prompt you to do something further. So if they go, well, yeah, I've got a boyfriend and he's 30. Okay. You know, that there's gonna, you know, you're gonna have to speak to somebody else and so on. If it's a case of they get very angry and defensive, again, it doesn't necessarily mean they're being abused or anything like that, but they might be, because it might be that, oh, hang on, mum or dad are onto what's going on here, so I need to get them away. It might be that they're angry that mum and dad are being nosy. You know, there's so many things, but it's about being curious. And often parents, in my experience, they want an answer. They want to know for an absolute fact. Is my son or daughter definitely in some inappropriate relationship? Are they been abused? I need to know. The nature of grooming, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, if it's sort of from a perpetrator linked to sexual exploitation and less familial abuse, it's hard to know. You can see the warning signs, but you can't know for a fact what they mean. So that's when you would say, right, speak to somebody else. Speak to a colleague if you're in social care, speak to other people, phone and log that you've made the phone call, log the name of the person you've spoken to when you did it, and just say, look, I've got a son or a daughter, etc. This is the situation. It might be nothing, but it might be something. I've seen some things. Where do we go from here? So a lot of local authorities now have what's called exploitation teams. Years ago, they used to be just called CSE, child sexual exploitation teams, and they'd be made up of multi-agency professionals and so on. Now they've changed, and I have concerns about it, but now they've changed to they've changed from sexual exploitation teams to exploitation teams. So they work with children at risk of or experiencing sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. Problem is that, you know, sometimes that can indirectly lend itself to saying, well, girls, sexual exploitation, boys, criminal exploitation. It's too, you know, it can be very problematic. But if you speak to social care, if you speak to your local child sexual exploitation team, if you have one, which you can find on Google, you can phone helplines such as the NSPCC. There's also PACE. PACE is PACE, which is Parents Against Child Exploitation. If you phone them and say, look, this isn't the situation I'm in, it might be something, it might be nothing, but what do I do here? They can give you support as a parent and signpost you and kind of go from there. But it's also about just keeping your eye out as well and keeping your eye open. But for me, it's about making sure that we don't panic more about the girls because they're girls and ignore the boys.
It's a very, very complicated subject, isn't it? Because, like I say, if you get it wrong, then you're the villain, and if you wait too long, you're the villain. So, yeah, it's like you say, it's all about, you know, finding that middle ground, and it's difficult.
It is very difficult, and the problem is that it's just sadly very easy to keep hidden. You know, as children get older and they go through puberty, they become adolescents, 13, 14, 15, they are understandably and rightly so given a certain amount of freedom. They're allowed to walk to the shops on their own, they go walk to school on their own, and that needs to happen because they've got to transition into adults and have independence and things. If you wrap them up in cotton wool, they're going to struggle to function as an adult. But the problem is that there is an element of risk that comes with that. And basically, I think we sadly now live in this society where we're demanding safety 100% of the time. And that would be lovely. But we need to be realistic. We're never going to have 100% safety. What we can do is try and reduce the risk in multiple different ways. But the older children get, they have to take educated risks, a safe-ish risk, if that makes sense, a reduced risk, but nothing's ever completely risk-free. It can't be. That's just not the world we live in. We can say it's relatively risk-free in some ways, but never 100% risk-free. And so we've got to be realistic when we try and address the issues as well.
And do you know the percentage of male and female abusers?
Well, this is an interesting one. So if you go to, and it depends, right? Okay, so we're talking about data and statistics here, right? So the problem with data and statistics, especially when it comes to sexual abuse or sexual offences, they are only as good as what is reported. Now, I'm not saying we should ignore data and statistics. I'm saying we should not put so much emphasis on them as we do. So first of all, which data source are we talking about, and what abuse are we talking about? So if we're talking about in England and Wales, and obviously this is just an example, you can widen this out, you can narrow it down. But if we're talking about sexual offences in England and Wales, right? Okay, well, reported sexual offences, suspected. So if you look at the Office of National Statistics, and again, the data within that comes from reported and recorded crimes via the police and reported or spoken experiences via the Crime in England and Wales survey, right? The questioning within the Crime in England and Wales survey, in my opinion, includes words and language that is not accessible to men, not accessible to boys. It's very victimized language, which I get why they do it. But I think if they
can you give an example of that? Can you give an example of the language?
Okay, so one that comes to mind, and I read this a year and a half ago, so I can't remember the details right now, but one example, so if you look at the CDC, the Center for Disease and Control in America, it doesn't stand for that anymore, does it? But let's just say the CDC for argument's sake. So the CDC in America, I think between 2010 and 2012 it was, again, I don't have the exact dates here, but between 2010 and 2012, they reported findings from a massive survey that they do every now and then. And I think it was the National Intimate Partner Crime and Sexual Violence Survey, something like that. And what everyone expected to find was that, hardly, when we talk about two crimes here, we talk about rape and forced to penetrate, okay? So rape, where a man uses his penis to rape someone. Forced to penetrate, where someone forces a man to use his penis to penetrate them without his consent, right? Now, before we get into the whole shouldn't that also be called rape? I believe it should. It's not, but legally, that's just how it is. I don't agree with it, but that's how it is. The data from CDC between 2010 and 2012, I believe it was, or was it 2012 and 2014, 2-year period, it showed that roughly, right, the same amount of women were being raped as the same amount of men were being forced to penetrate, okay? And everyone was really shocked at this, right? Everyone was really shocked at it. They didn't expect it, right? The reason I'm telling you this is because when you then look at the Crime in England and Wales survey, nowhere, or certainly last time I looked, nowhere in the actual survey, the questions, nowhere does it ask, have you been forced to penetrate? It does not ask that question. The fact it'll ask something else. Have you been forced to do things that maybe you didn't want to do, and so on? But I think I remember I've read it. It's a bit too vague, and then in other ways it's not. It needs to be a bit more specific. But what we know is that what we see from the CDC is that if you ask people and you include the option, have you ever been forced to penetrate someone? Men are going, yeah, I have. But I guarantee you, if you ask those same men, have you ever been a victim of sexual assault or violence? Most of them will go, no. But then you ask them, have you ever been forced to penetrate? They go, yeah. And it's that victimized language that is not necessarily accessible to men. Now, some of these men might be like, yeah, and it was horrible and it traumatized me. Some men might be like, well, yeah, I'm angry at the double standard. Some men might go, yeah, I was forced to penetrate, but it didn't really affect me. The effects of it are a separate issue. They're important, of course. But it's about saying, if we stop and we ask boys and men, have you ever been forced to penetrate someone when you didn't want to? CDC data is showing that when we ask that, it shows that the rates speak for themselves. So why don't we ask that question here in England and Wales? Well, we can surmise and guess why. But in answer to your original question, I think the data would say that something like, I don't know, 92% of sexual offences show a male perpetrator, right? That's, but again, that I think is from the ONS generally tend to focus more on victims and perpetrators generally, but that is from sources like the Office of National Statistics, which relies on police involvement. More women than men will go to the police, generally speaking, because we've got the National College for Policing promoting, we will, and I quote, prioritize crimes against women and girls, right, then is it any wonder?
Yeah.
You know, what you know, we are giving the message out there that any sort of harm perpetrated against girls and women is important, it matters, and we will deal with it. And I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is it matters more than any harm that boys and men experience. So when boys and men are seeing all this, some boys and men were going, well, I'm not really going to bother because they don't care. They're not going to help me. They're not going to support me. They won't take me seriously. I'm not a girl or a woman, so why do I bother? So, and then within that, you have the offence of rape, which in England and Wales can only legally be committed by someone with a penis. So the parts of the legal system, the legislation, the message that the mainstream media and the government is giving boys and men is that you really don't matter as much as abused girls and women. So if that's the message that the boys and men are getting, why would they bother disclosing? So then they don't disclose. Then the data shows a lot more girls and women experiencing abuse than boys and men. And then people look at that data to go, well, it's happening more to girls and women. No, it's not. Girls and women are just reporting more because you're making it a lot less difficult for them to report compared to boys and men.
Do you know what? This pisses me off because every single subject that I've spoken about on this show, every single one, the same story. It's the same story. Men are made to feel inadequate or shameful for reporting. They're made to feel unimportant all the time. The language, even when it came to anorexia, the language in the questionnaire was female orientated. And it just pissing me off. And it's every single subject, every single one, the same story. How do we change that? Is it just down to education? Or
I don't think it's a simple answer because there's so many different groups of people. You know, so you've got those that are absolutely vicious in terms of, yes, I do hate men. I hate them all. Yes, I am a proud misandrist. I'm proud to hate men. Yes, I would never help a man. I hate men. And then you've got the other groups that are a little less subtle, where they don't say it, but their actions clearly imply that they expect men to endure a lesser response because they're men. You know, the violence against women and girls strategy, for example, the version that came out in the middle of last year, I think it was, Priti Patel actually was quoted in the actual document of saying, later this year, I will publish my work on male victims and boys and men because we shouldn't forget about them. It's now, nearly April 2022. We're still waiting.
Yeah.
We're still waiting. And to be fair, maybe that work was published and it just wasn't highlighted, or maybe I just don't know about it. But I know enough people in the sector who would say, Phil, the work was published, here it is, shut up. Fair enough. But I've emailed Priti Patel, no response yet. I've sent multiple tweets, nothing. And again, I think it's just that, well, you're boys and men, you're expected to wait, aren't you? You know, look at what happened at the college in Brisbane in Australia, where the boys I don't know if it was all of the boys or boys in a year group, I can't remember, but the boys were all sort of told to stood up in an assembly, stand opposite the girls and apologise to them for crimes committed against them by their gender.
Fucking hell.
You know, and thankfully that made the news. Parents were going, what the hell? This is absolutely appalling. But the really scary thing is, can you imagine any other demographic being treated like this in such a way where it just seems to be socially acceptable? No, I don't think we could. And what we need to be doing is we need to stop setting up a hierarchy of demographics that it's okay to abuse. What we need to be is, it's not okay to abuse anyone based on their characteristics and demographics. That's regardless, that's what we should be promoting. But in answer to your question, so yeah, I think we need to challenge these attitudes. We need to educate. In my opinion, we need to, you know, I speak very emotionally about it, as you can see. But I think we also need to have a proportionate amount of emotion, but have logic and rational discussion. So one of the things I often say to people is, are we really saying it's okay to demonize an entire demographic because some of them abuse? and you get people coming up with all sorts of hateful things. And I said, how is this going to help? You know, there are boys out there who are being abused. When you focus on them being perpetrators and ignore how they're victims, how is that going to help how is that going to help them in any way, shape or form? I tweeted something a few weeks ago where someone had told me that there was some education lessons being delivered in a school college about consent and respect. And allegedly boys had said that was shit. It was like I was a rapist in the making. They spoke to me like I was a perpetrator, etc. And I said, this is not the way to do it. You know, all children, regardless of gender, need to be taught about the importance of respect and consent. All of them. Don't just do it in a way that focuses on girls as victims and boys as perpetrators. Oh, the amount of, I mean, I got quite a lot of support, but a huge amount of criticism, you know, oh, that's right, boys are going around raping girls all the time, but yeah, let's not treat them like rapists. You know, it's just comments like that are just not helpful. So in answer to your question, I think we need to challenge appropriately. If we just receive hate and nastiness and the problem is, how can you get people like that to change their mind? If they're not open to it, then maybe we just need to educate, challenge, you know, don't put up with that. But actually those that are a little more less viciously aggressive, it might be, okay, can we have a conversation about this? Let's try and understand each other. What is this about? Why are you doing this? Do you know what the facts are? Do you know how the, you know, certain data is influenced? You know, what does that mean? And actually, you know, if we say that certain data shows that most of the perpetrators are men, well, actually, what does the CDC say? What about the CDC in America saying all of these men have been forced to penetrate, the vast majority by women? Are we just going to ignore that because it doesn't fit the narrative? Why can't we just say that there are ways in which, generally speaking, that men perpetrate harm? There are ways, generally speaking, that women perpetrate harm. Making it a hierarchy for victimhood is not helpful. It's not empowering. Let's just kind of accept that. And let's also accept that there is a huge amount of data, research, literature out there that shows there are specific reasons why boys and men don't disclose. And in my experience, and from what I've read and from what I've done in my work, I've seen that there are three main reasons. Boys and men who are abused don't disclose because they see it as a threat to their masculinity on some level. They see it as they're worried that people might think they're gay, or they're worried that they'll be labelled as the perpetrator, or it'll be twisted for them to be perpetrator. Those three elements, you don't really see women saying those things. I'm not saying never, but rarely, because it generally applies more to boys and men because of the nature of those elements. And these are that along with the whole, well, we're making it a lot less difficult for girls and women to disclose than we are boys and men. Let's focus more on boys and men as perpetrators and less as victims. All of this coupled together, and the you know, Section 1 of the Sexual Offences Act making it so rape is only committed by a man. All of that, it's almost as if the powers that be have got together and said, what can we do to make it difficult for boys and men to disclose, so we can peddle and over focus on the female victim, male perpetrator narrative.
And of course, as we mentioned earlier, you've got the apathy on top of that.
Yes.
Which makes it even more difficult because men are not fighting for themselves either.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a real shame. I think, you know, the question, should men do more? You know, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. I think they could do more, but the sad reality is that when many men do try to do more, they get given hate. Every year, International Men's Day, you know, there's always people out there sending hate, vicious hate in some ways. You know, certain events that go on all over the country, people try and cancel them. The UN, the United Nations, they, on their website, they have a list of sort of days that are celebrated. Yeah, they on the day that International Women's Day is there, they go, on this day it's International Women's Day. On the day that International Men's Day is occurring in November, they don't mention that, but they mention International Toilet Day, which is on the same day. Yeah, oh, absolutely. So, you know what I mean? You can't.
Well, that speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Exactly. But I think the thing is, I think some there's two things about men doing more. People have tried to cancel me many times, And in some ways, sadly, they've succeeded, but I'll just roll with the punches and deal with it. In other ways, they haven't succeeded. But people try and cancel these, there's two things. If you speak up, you will get hate, threats, viciousness, online bullying. And the second one is, and the second point is that you'll be labelled a misogynist, and they'll try and cancel you. And so that's the problem. So the BPS, the British Psychological Society, a few years ago, I can't remember the exact date, but a few years ago, they set up the male psychology section of the BPS. And it went through and it was great. But there were people who opposed it. No, we don't want that. We don't need it. We shouldn't have it. Why do men need anything? No, we don't need it. Not at all. Let's get rid of it. There were even people trying to stop it, I believe, from what I hear. But they'd already had I think the women's part of the BPS, and no one was saying we want to take anything away from women. And that's the point. There's this perception that if you are addressing issues that affect boys and men, whatever they are, that means you want to take something away from girls and women. No, not at all. And I have not met one man, I'm sure there are some out there, but I've not met one man or woman who has said, yeah, we want to take it all away from girls and women. Not at all. And anyone who does think that, well, that's not helpful.
you get to share the cash though, and they don't want that.
That's an interesting point. I mean, so if you look at the so if you look at the data from the Office of National Statistics, and again, that's just one data source with certain routes to the data being provided, which we have to think about. I think the last time I checked, it was something like 33%, 1 in 3, roughly, victims of domestic abuse, men, right? So, so would logic, if we focus so much on the ONS data, as many of us do, wouldn't logic then say that maybe a third of the funding available should go to male victims? Well, but it doesn't. I'm pretty sure it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And then what you've then got is something else. So most of the funding goes towards girls and women. But then what you've got is you've got the Office of National Statistics specifically saying that most victims of violent crimes, when you take all the violence together, are men. Yeah. True. That's what the data from the ONS says. So you think, oh, okay, well, then that must mean then that most funding will go towards men. No, not at all. So it's like, it really doesn't matter what the data says, because the powers that be who are holding the purse strings are basically saying we will give most of the funding to women no matter what the data says.
Yeah.
And so when we're cherry picking, it really, you can absolutely see, can't you, why boys and men think that society and the world and the mainstream media and the government doesn't really care about them.
Yeah, it's a very emotional subject. I can see that you're emotional about it, and I get very emotional about it, including getting annoyed about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
When it comes to environments for boys of sexual abuse, what is there any environments that are more prone to sexual
I mean, that's
abuse?
an interesting one. I think so. So you've obviously got all the experiences of what happened with the Boy Scouts of America, and them now, sort of linked to bankruptcy and things like that. That's some things in the world of sport. I'm certainly not saying girls and young women do not experience sexual abuse within the Boy Scouts, because I know they have taken on girls in the past and that they don't experience it in sport. But if you look at data, research, lots of, I think Mike Hartle from Edgehill University in Birmingham, he's done a lot of research in sport. A lot of the data out there shows that it is mainly boys that experience these abuse. And if you think about it, it's an ideal environment. If you want to abuse a boy, then you've got an arena where you can sort of play around with perceptions of masculinity, which can hide the perpetration of abuse, but also contribute towards boys not saying anything. You've got states of undress, toilets, changing room, showers, things like that. You've got elements of touch involved as well, sports massage when you have an injury and things. So it's almost as if on some level that arena, it makes it ideal for perpetrators. Again, vast majority of people in the world of sport do not do these horrific crimes, but it can happen. The other thing as well, so if you go to the the inquiry into child sexual abuse website, sort of in London. I won't say all, because I don't think I've read them all, but a significant number of reports that highlight abuse within institutions highlight a significant number. I would probably even say most of the victims were boys.
Mm-hmm.
So children's homes, schools, places like that, they do highlight that a large number of victims were boys. Very interesting. Some of the reports, they don't really focus on, look, most of these victims are boys. What does that mean? I suspect if those reports had have said most of these victims were girls, let's focus on that, that would have happened, but it didn't. But that's just my opinion. But ultimately, boys can be abused in so many different places, in the home, sadly, online, in so many different places. I think my thoughts are sometimes is masculinity relevant, and sometimes it's not at all. But sometimes it might be, because if you are abusing a boy and you want to you can use perceptions around masculinity, what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a man, how you can use that, So for example, I know that some Males have been told that, well, it wouldn't have happened if you'd have just manned up and dealt with it. You wouldn't have, just man up, hit them back. That sort of, these really throwaway comments that we still hear in this day and age. There's a number of examples where the boy's idea about what it means to be a man has been used and manipulated against him by the perpetrator to make him comply with the abuse, make him see it's not abuse, but actually also prevent him from disclosing the abuse. And that, I often talk about that. They're the four serious elements that seriously need addressing when we're talking about the sexual abuse of boys and men. They are less likely to be identified as being at risk of sexual abuse or being victims of it. They are less likely to recognize that they are being or have been abused, or they'll play it down. They're less likely to disclose it, and they're less likely to engage with services. And why are all those things there? Well, one of the biggest factors that influences those four strands is the message that society gives us. And it's that, boys and men do not matter. The fact that you are victims, we don't care. We're going to put all the funding into focusing on girls and women. We're going to make news stories about girls and women. We're going to do all of this. You don't matter. We don't care about you. You are the perpetrators, not the victims. And this really rigid, narrow-minded way of thinking is, you see it in the media and the headlines and things on TV. And boys and men are not stupid. They see this, they hear this. And I think that has a serious effect.
And what are the short-term and long-term effects of that, of them going through that?
The short-term effects. Sorry, do you mean of
being sexually abused?
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. So first of all, you have to recognise that you've been abused. So there are some boys who are abused. They are sexually abused as a child, an adolescent, whatever, but they don't recognise it as abuse, because they don't have the right idea. I was sexually abused at 16, and I did not know what was going on with me was sexual abuse. It was weird and a bit out of the ordinary, but I didn't think it was sexual abuse. Why did I not think it was sexual abuse? No one told me all the different types of sexual abuse. No one told me all the different types of, all the different ways that young people can be groomed and sexually abused and sexually exploited. No one had explained that. So if you don't have a clear understanding of all the different forms of sexual abuse, when it does happen to you, you can be left with some question marks about, hang on a minute, am I being sexually abused or not here? Okay. Then you've got all the, the fact that many girls are being told, your body, your choice, look after yourself, when boys are being told, don't rape. So that's an issue. So first of all, you've got to if you don't recognize it's sexual abuse, what can then happen is you get a bit older. 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. Then when you're a bit older, you might look back on your childhood and think, hang on, that was sexual abuse. So the sexual abuse happened here. You've recognized it here. And now it's like, what do you do about that? Now you might go, I'm not going to do anything about it. I've dealt with it. It's over. I'm safe now. I've got my own resilience to get on with life. And you get on with life relatively unaffected. Some go, oh my God, I've just realized that there was sexual abuse and I've just realized it now. Then you can suddenly be hit with trauma, you develop anxiety, you think you're weak, you have all these things. So then it's like, well, hang on, I'll go to therapy. I'll talk to someone about it. I'll take action. I'll try and deal with it, right? But some might go, well, hang on, no. And these are where perceptions of masculinity come in. Hang on a minute. I've just realized that what happened then was abuse. That's terrible. That's awful. I feel really weak. Well, hang on. If I speak to someone about it now, then that's another knock to my masculinity. That's another example of me being weak because I'm speaking to someone and getting help. So I'm weak. So I won't say anything. So I'll go internalize. I'll get depression, drugs, alcohol, self-harm, suicide, etc. What we need to do is reframe it and go, well, hang on a minute. No, this happened then. You've now realized that this here later on, it was abuse. It's affecting you. So you've identified a problem. You can consider your options that you can put in place to try and solve the problem. That's you taking control or trying to take control. Yeah. And that's strength. And you're doing it even though it's difficult for you. That's strength. So we reframe it, right? The other thing as well is they get to this point and rather than going, I'm going to access therapy or I'll get help or I'll go become withdrawn, the other option is that someone will go, well, hang on a minute. My masculinity has been damaged. My masculinity has been. I've just realised that what happened then was abuse. I've realised it now. Right, I'm going to show the world and myself that I'm a tough guy. And this is where violence, aggression, acting out comes in. And don't get me wrong, there are ways to act out, as it were, that can be useful and good. Some, sadly, they go around looking for fights. That's certainly what I did. When I realized that I'd been abused, I was looking around for fights. I was looking to get into fights with people. I'm not proud of it. And look at the state of me. Can you imagine me in a fight? But the point was I wanted to show people that what was done to me did not make me weak. I was strong and I was going out there getting into fights. But the thing is, we can show the world and ourselves that we are still strong in different ways, in less harmful ways, in less abusive ways, in less ways that get us into trouble, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing, is like, I've been abused. I've recognized I've been abused. I'm now going to respond to that abuse. That can all happen within 30 minutes. It can happen over a period of 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the actual effects are very, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, intrusive thoughts, feeling that you are less of a man, that you're weak, all of that sort of stuff, confusion, wanting to take action. But the really interesting thing is I've worked with a number of boys and men where they've come to me just for 1 or 2 sessions, and that's been enough.
Yeah.
And when I've spoken to them, it's what they've said they found useful was the education, the psychoeducation. This is when I was raped, or when she or he did this to me, this is what I did and this is what I didn't do. And all right, okay, so you explain how the brain works, you explain what goes on in the body, you explain the science, you explain the logic.
Yeah.
Right? And I found that a number of boys and men that I've worked with have gone, I don't need any more sessions. I just needed to know that I wasn't going mad. I just needed to know that my response didn't make me abnormal. And so understanding it can really, really help. But from a science point of view, and that's the thing about many boys and men that I've certainly worked with, they want to understand the science. They want to understand the sort of logic. And when you break it down to them and give them the logic, I find so many of them find it really useful. Yeah. And then you can work with them around, how to manage their anxiety, how to reduce their anxiety, how eventually to hopefully eliminate it and things like that. But yeah, there's so many different ways it can affect boys and girls and men and women. But what we need to really do is give them the message that, well, actually, if it is affecting you, just because you're a boy or a man doesn't mean it matters less at all. It's affecting you, and we can help you.
I think anybody who's seen me talk on the videos that I put on YouTube or heard me on the radio tour that I'm doing now, they'll hear me repeatedly say, talk, talk, talk. That's the most important thing you can do. We need to get over this. Oh, I'm a man. I can't say this. I'm going to be weak and stuff. Okay, you're going to seem weak to some people, but we need to be vulnerable. Everybody can be vulnerable every day. People are vulnerable, men and women. So we need to admit that we can be vulnerable and admit that something's going wrong and talk about it. Women do it all the time. Women can't shut up talking about it.
Yeah, the thing is with that, and I think there's absolutely validity in what you've said. I think there are some men, arguably a big chunk of them, that they won't engage with that sort of language again. So it's like, we need to admit, we need to be vulnerable. For some men, they will absolutely. And I think what the problem that we sometimes have is we see methods and approaches, we use them with girls and women, and they work.
Yeah.
And what we often do is we go, well, they're working with girls and women. Why aren't they working with boys and men? Well, despite what certain people think, that the science over a number of years is pretty consistent and shows that there are, on average, differences between men and women. Yeah, there doesn't mean that all women are the same and all men are the same and all of that, but there are structural differences in the brain and all of that, level how testosterone affects things and so on and all of that. But if you look at sort of what research says, or some emerging research from counsellors, psychotherapists, etc., they say, well, we found that women wanted to come to therapy and, generally speaking, talk, express their emotions and so on. Nothing wrong with that. They then say that, generally speaking, I'm generalising, men wanted to take action and do something. And I think what we do is we pathologise that approach. No, men just need to come and talk and open up. Well, some do and some will, and that's fine. But just because it works with women doesn't mean we should say it should work with men. We don't do it the other way around, do we? We don't say to women, no, you need to stop talking about your emotions, just do something about your problem and take action. We would never do that. It would be unthinkable. But what we need to perhaps accept is that women, on average, in general, prefer this approach. Again, I'm talking about averages here, and that's fine. Men prefer a different approach, and that's fine as well. And so I think if we say to, so for example, my website used to be all a little bit airy fairy, fluffy emotions and feelings and all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Yeah. But I read the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health, and it totally changed my outlook. And I changed the wording on my website. And so where, for example, I might have once said something like, come to therapy, talk about your emotions, express your feelings, it's okay, and all of that. I changed that to confront your problems, take action, take control, that sort of thing, right? So very different word is, I saw a significant increase in men coming to me for sessions. A significant increase. And what happened was more boys and men were coming to therapy because the language was used with them that was accessible to them. They did come to therapy and they expressed their feelings and emotions, but it wasn't come to therapy and express it. It was like take control. So when they came to, this is the problem, and as they express it, they express their sadness, they express their anger. They just did it naturally, but they did it naturally through a different path, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But the point is, did it harm them? No. Did it help them engage in therapy? Yes. Did it contribute towards a positive outcome for them? Yes. And so that's what.
So it's the same approach is opening up, but what you're saying is we've got to get there by a different route. We've got to use male language to get the same result then. Yeah.
Not for everyone. It's different. If you're working with a guy and it's an emotional focused approach and you're talking, you're giving empathy, you are with what we call the core conditions and you're acting, nothing wrong with that if it's working. But if it's not working, what we often do is we assume that the guy is not ready for therapy. He doesn't want therapy. He's not ready to engage. No, it might just mean that he's not ready to engage with a particular approach. And that's okay. It might mean that he doesn't want to engage with that approach. He wants more problem solving, solution focused, action orientated. Work. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's different things for different people. And there is certainly more chance, in my experience, and from what the research says, that you're more likely to engage men on average if you use language such as you're taking control, you are taking action, you're solving the problem, and so on. Because if you kind of go, well, and there's nothing wrong with saying, well, there's no wrong with coming here and being vulnerable. If that works and he engaged, fine. But actually, hang on a minute, I was raped when I was younger. I must have been vulnerable then. When I acknowledged it, I felt really vulnerable and weak. Now I'm coming to therapy and you're saying, yeah, you are vulnerable, but that's okay. No, that's not okay with me. I don't want to be vulnerable and everything. And it's about going, oh, okay, well, Yeah, so let's explore that. And I think it's about saying, we're all going to be vulnerable in life, from birth to death, where there are going to be times in our life where we are vulnerable. But maybe it's not about saying this is the right or wrong way to see it. It's about there are different ways. And it's about, so yeah, you come into therapy, you could see it as, I'm coming to therapy, it means I can't control my life, I'm really vulnerable and I'm weak. That's a way of looking at it. But could it also be reasonable to say that you don't really want to be here, but you've still made the decision to come here, even though it's difficult for you? That doesn't sound like weakness. That sounds like strength. So actually, it would, from your own, it would be easy, just don't come here. But you have come here, even though it's difficult for you. So you've done something you don't really want to do, and you find it difficult. You're still doing it. You're still here. That's strength. And if you think about it, maybe it might feel a bit uncomfortable being here, but you know what? You're still here, and we're still talking. And maybe, and I like to kind of use different language. I'll say, maybe just see this as two guys working together, trying to figure things out and solve problems. Oh, I like that. Yeah, that sounds good. I like that. Well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But for some people, you can say, maybe you can just see this as a counsellor who is sitting with you during your vulnerability and help you experience that vulnerability so you can work through it. A lot of men won't like that.
Yeah.
But it's just using different approaches. It
That's
doesn't
very
mean
interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that, oh my God, some will go, why can't you just sit with these men and help them be vulnerable? Well, I can, but it's about, am I doing that because I think that's what I should do? Whose agenda am I really focusing on? And if you sit with that person you're working with, you'll get a sense of where they're at, what's going on, and so on, and all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I think many of us pathologize it. Oh, you're not helping this guy sit down and express his emotions. Well, yeah, I am. I'm just doing it in a different way. And for some guys, it might be, and I've had this before, where they've said, I don't just want to sit here and talk about how crap I feel. I've had that with my other therapist. I don't want that. Okay, tell me what you do want. I want to do something. Okay, that's fine. If that's what you want, let's do it. And, I remember working with one guy, and again, I have his permission to share this. I remember working with one guy who was abused by a friend of the family when he was a child. And when he realized that this had happened to him when he was older, he wanted to do something. And what he would do, he would spend his spare time searching the internet to see if the man who abused him was still alive, where he was, what he was doing. And he said, I have no idea what I'll do if I find him, but it feels good to be doing something. And
is that healthy? Is that healthy though?
Yeah, absolutely. He's not hurting anyone. He's not hurting himself. It wasn't obsessive. But one of the things we said, let's just play that out. Because if he's sitting down and he's sitting at home and he's watching TV and he's feeling fidgety and all that, his body said, move, take action, do something. And many of us, especially men, levels of testosterone, things like that, we feel that need to move, to take action when we feel angry or anxious or something's on our mind. That's just science. And there's no wrong with that. It's just making sure that the action we take is not abusive. Arguably, it's better that he goes on his laptop and spends a couple of hours searching for this guy than goes outside and punch someone in the face. So it's about how can you channel that and use it in a way. But it's like, I just feel better for doing something and trying to do something. Yeah, if he was obsessing and it was, that might be, but it wasn't obsessive. It was proportionate. And we did explore, what will you do if you find him? Do you think you will find him? And so on and all that. But again, so it's exploring the nuances and the specifics within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what you were just saying about language. That's made me think about my language that I use. And yeah, I think you're right. I think a different approach needs to be taken. I think that's a very, very interesting point.
The Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology is a brilliant book. It completely opened my mind to just really new ways of working. And when I read this, I was just completely, if I'm being honest, I was a bit embarrassed that I was reading it and it just made common sense. I had the same, oh my God, yeah, that just makes so much more sense. I was like, why have I not thought about this before? And I think it's because a lot of training that we have is feelings, emotions, and sit and experience and be, and there's nothing wrong with that. The thing that is wrong with that is assuming it should work for every single person that you see, and that if it doesn't, there's something wrong with that person. That's the thing. It's different things for different people. And so, it is about using that sort of what they call male-friendly language Again, I know a lot of people don't like that term male-friendly language, but it's not meant to offend or upset. It's just meant to sort of acknowledge what the science says. It's meant to acknowledge what boys and men who have over a period of time accessed therapy found useful and what they wanted. And certainly in my experience and some of the people that I supervise and support, they have said, yeah, he engages much more. He engages at a different level when we use certain language like that, rather than rather than feelings and emotions and focusing too much on that. It's focusing on what he's thinking, what he's doing, what the logic says, how he's taking control, how he's trying to succeed, how he's identified a problem and solved it or trying to solve it. Very different wording. But you do get those that go, that's bad that you're using that wording. Why? Just because it's not the traditional way doesn't mean it's bad. The walk and talk therapy is now a thing. A few years ago, this was relatively frowned on. People go, no, you can't go outside with someone you're working with and walk with them. That's bad. Now the people are having training in it, and a lot of the research, a lot of the science says that on average, boys and men will talk more, and when they rather shoulder to shoulder rather than eye to eye.
Yeah.
And actually, well, that's great, isn't it? Because actually, if you are with a guy and you're walking with him, obviously there's ethics and confidentiality and all of the other stuff to consider. But if you're walking with him, you're outside, you're walking, you're engaging in bilateral stimulation, left, right, left, right, left, right, which calms you and soothes you. You don't have to look someone in the eye, which can feel uncomfortable. You're walking around, you're moving, you're taking action. And it can be really, really useful.
Interesting. So what does the future hold for Phil Mitchell apart from EastEnders?
Okay, I like to think I look a bit more like Ben Mitchell when he had his black thick glasses on. I don't think I'm as old as Phil Mitchell, not yet anyway. There's a couple of projects I'm working on. I think I have to be very careful what I say, because there are those out there that will see and hear me addressing issues affecting boys and men and try and cancel me, as happened in the past, sadly. So I have to be very careful what I say. But yes, there is a project that I'm currently working on. I don't want to say too much about it, but I've had some amazing support from professionals within a similar field around this project, so that this project will absolutely address the sexual abuse of boys and men, and it will also look at how sort of misandrist attitudes around that play a part and how gender bias plays a part. So that project, which I don't want to say too much about right now, but that project will be out later this year. So
awesome.
Watch this space or follow me on Twitter, Phil Mitchell 83. You'll see more on that. I'm delivering a few webinars, which is quite nice. I'm hoping that maybe once more restrictions around COVID ease, I might be delivering some training. And if I'm being honest, also looking forward to working a little bit less. That might be quite nice as well. That's kind of it for me. But I think I'm quite keen to carry on highlighting and addressing the issues boys and men face, including the issues related to sexual abuse and why they don't recognize it, why they're not identified, why they don't disclose, and why they don't engage.
And if people want to get in touch with you, whether it to be counseled by yourself or just to have a chat, how can they do that?
Well, there's a couple of ways really. So if you can send me a direct message on Twitter. So as I say, I'm on Twitter quite a lot, Phil Mitchell 83. But you can find my website, which is counsellingwithphil.co.uk. So that's counsellingwithphil.co.uk, and you'll find me on there, and you'll see a bit about me, what I do, what I don't do, my approaches, all of that sort of stuff. So there's information on there. So yeah.
Awesome. And I really enjoyed talking to you today, Phil. It's a very, very important conversation, and it's made me think. So if it makes me think, hopefully it'll make other people think as well.
Fingers crossed. That's the idea. I think if we can just get more conversations going, and I think if we can just think a little bit more, and that, I think there are some people out there, sadly, whose views will never change. There's an element of rigidity, but those that are a little less rigid, maybe they'll hear certain things and it might make them think a little bit more about, their own approach, or what boys and men do go through that maybe we need to give a bit more attention to.
Well, bless you, sir, for talking to me today.
Thank you.
And thanks very much. I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Take care, mate.
Yeah, you too.